When it comes to building AI agents in real world scenarios, like for example, a receptionist, it is important that we're adding the human touch that it needs. So for example, if I'm making a call to a doctor's office, then I would like the receptionist to remember what our last conversation was about, as well as my personal information. So for this case, there's multiple ways you can do it. And one of them is having information in a database, such like a CRM or a Google Sheets, from where the user's information gets pulled based on their phone number and it's given to the agent so that it has that context. Another way is a little bit more advanced, in which you're going to be using relationship graphs. And what a relationship graph is basically an AI brain which behaves like a human brain. It behaves in a human way in terms of the memory, because it creates entities between different inputs that are given to them to better remember that person and what their previous conversations have been about. So in this video, I want to show you how you can integrate a relationship graph named Zep into Vapi so that your agents are more powerful and more consistent. And before we dive in, I want to show you a quick demo. I'm going to be calling the agent and I'm going to tell it like a fun fact about me, and then I'm going to call him back and see if it remembers that. And so I'm just going to trigger here my test webhook, give him a call on my phone.
Hello, Josue. This is Josh from Sun HVAC. How can I help you today?
Hey, do you want to know a fun fact about me?
Hi, Josue. I'd love to hear a fun fact about you. What is it?
So I actually really like rock climbing.
That's awesome, Josue. I mean, this is a big one.
Right. So I just hang up on him, and we're gonna wait a second because there's stuff going in the back end, which is basically getting the end of call report and storing the transcript into Zep, which is then gonna create a relationship graph, and it's gonna start building up that brain the more we talk to the agent. So I'm gonna call him back. We should be good right now.
Hello, Josue. This is Josh from Sun HVAC. How can I help you today?
Hey, do you remember the fun fact I told you about me?
Hey, Josue. Yes, you mentioned you really like rock climbing. How can I assist you today?
So as you see, it does remember. And this is a very simple example, of course. So let me dive a little deeper into what a relationship graph is and how it can help out in the future once the conversation gets a little longer, and in the case that this is going to be a customer that might be passed to a different agent so that it has that brain of the prospect. So let's get into it. So first of all, this is Zep right here. And I want to show you what a relationship graph looks like. So if I go into view graph, this is pretty much what it looks like. It is a brain that the agent has for itself. It's not native in Vapi or N8N. This is a third-party platform that takes care of doing that. And the way that it does it is by receiving the transcript of a conversation with different roles. So let's say you have the role of the user and the role of the assistant. In this case, the role of the assistant is going to be the agent that's calling through Vapi, and then the user is going to be the prospect. And so what's happening is the transcript is being converted into sort of like a chat history, and it's being inputted into here, which then creates this brain and relationship graphs, which is basically multiple relationships between different kinds of entities. So if we go up here into entity types, you can see that each color means a different thing. So let's say an activity or an assistant, an attraction. So this is just the example that Zep provides us when we first sign up into their platform. But if we look around and we, for example, click on umbrella, we see this small window pops up over here, and it gives you like a summary of what it is. So here it says the entity is an umbrella, and based on the conversation, it is recommended to pack an umbrella for the trip to Paris. So this looks like it was a conversation with a user, and they were talking about going to Paris and that it might be raining. So either the assistant or the user mentioned that having an umbrella can be useful, and that's how it got stored in the memory. And so the cool thing about this is that we can then, based on the user query, we can then extract specific information that might be stored related to a specific entity. So let's say if our conversation gets really long and I ask you something that was mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, if we were to only provide the chat history or the transcript back to the agent, it would be a very long conversation, and the context window will have to be very long for it to be able to catch those details. So in this case, we can make an API call directly to the brain. The brain will look for that entity, get what the summary is, and then we'll give a response based on that. And so if we actually go to the conversation that I just had that was really brief, and I go into view graph, we can see it's very small. Like we have one entity here called rock climbing, and we can say, it says my name likes rock climbing, which the assistant noted is a great workout. It also says my phone number for some reason, but you can kind of have an idea of how the entities are being created as the conversation gets longer. So now I want to guide you step by step, because these are two workflows working together. What's going to be the one that's triggering the call, and the other one's going to be the one that actually stores all the transcript into Zep itself. So we're going to start off by going into Vapi, and what you're going to do is you're going to create a new assistant, and you can name it whatever. I mean, I put HVAC because I'm simulating this in HVAC business, and you can just copy the prompt that I have here. It's a very simple prompt. I'll put it down in the resource link. But basically what we're going to have is a qualification criteria, some other questions and rules. It's a very basic prompt, but what really matters here is that we're going to have two dynamic variables. So one's going to be the context and the other one's going to be the call history. So the context is going to come from the brain directly, and the call history is just going to be like the transcript, and we're going to have a context window. So we might have like the last 20 messages that were talked between the user and the agent, and they're going to get pasted here when we trigger the call. And so now let's go into N8N and start setting things up. So we're going to start off by building the call trigger. And basically what this means is that we're going to be calling the phone number, and the phone number is going to trigger this webhook that's then going to pull the assistant. And once the assistant gets pulled, it's going to redirect it to the one that we just created in Vapi. And that's the one that's going to be picking up the phone. But if you think about it, between when the webhook is received to when the agent is triggered, we have a bunch of space in there in between, which we can manipulate data before the agent picks up. So we're going to start off by creating a webhook. You want to change the method to post, and then you want to copy this link. Now you want to go into Vapi and you want to look for the phone number that you'll be using for this agent. And it's important that you go where it says phone number server URL and paste that webhook in there. So I'm just going to replace that one because that was for a different test that I was running. I'm going to hit save. And so now let me run the test webhook, and I'm going to call it.
Couldn't get assistant.
You're going to get a message that says that you couldn't get the assistant. But let's see what came in through the call. So as you can see, there's a bunch of information, but really what we're going to be needing here is going to be the phone number. So now let's actually go ahead and set up the agent. So if I go to webhook, so we're going to get the response to webhook, JSON, and then we want to edit this one so that it says respond using the webhook node. So now we're going to be calling the agent directly using the JSON here. We're going to edit some values in there, and I'm going to guide you step by step how to do this. So you want to add in the following JSON structure. And these are the only things that we're going to be needing. As you see, we're going to need the assistant ID of the assistant that we created in Vapi. We're going to need the assistant overrides, which are just going to be variable values, which are those variables that are in the prompt itself in between the curly braces. So we're going to have a first name, a context, and a call history. That's all that's going to be passed whenever we add stuff in between when the webhook's triggered to when we're calling the assistant. So let's start filling this stuff out. So I'm going to go back to the agent. So I want to go ahead and copy the assistant ID that's going to be up there. Paste it in here. Then we're going to have the assistant overrides, the first name, the context, and the call history. So for now, I'm just going to hard code my first name, see if it picks it up. And I'm going to test the webhook one more time.
Hello, Josue. This is Josh from Sun HVAC. How can I help you today?
So as you can see, it picked up. It didn't say that the assistant that it couldn't get the assistant. So now we can go ahead and play around with some stuff here in between. But before we do that, why don't we go ahead and set up Zep? You're going to head into getzep.com, and then you're going to either sign up or log in if you already have an account. I already have an account, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to call this tutorial. And you want to do the same thing. And so we're going to create a key. I'm just going to call this N8N. And I'm going to copy it. Make sure you save it somewhere, because once you close that little window, you're not able to copy it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a sticky note. I'm just going to paste it in there for now, just in case I need to copy other stuff. But I'm going to go back to Zep. And as you can see, we have tutorial. So now the idea is that whenever a call ends, we're going to be storing their phone number and the transcript somewhere here in Zep. And that's going to be under users. So as you can see, if I click on add a user, it kind of brings you over to the documentation on how to do it, because you can only do it through the API. So I'm going to teach you guys how to do that. So we're not done with this workflow, but we're going to create another one in which we're going to be creating the user and storing the information into Zep. So we're going to start off by creating a webhook. For now, you don't need to worry about the webhook URL, but what we want to do is we're going to add a filter. And then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and test the webhook. This webhook is going to be receiving the end of call report. So I'm going to copy my test URL. I'm going to go back to Vapi, and under advanced, if I scroll a little down, I'm going to see messaging, and you're going to see we have server settings. So what you want to do is you want to paste in here the test URL. We're going to publish it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to call the agent one more time, and I'm going to start both test webhooks so that we can get some data.
Hello, Josue. This is Josh from Sun HVAC. How can I help you today?
Hey, I want to learn more about your services.
Sure, Josue. We offer installations, repairs, maintenance, and...
Okay, perfect. So I just ended the call. The end of call report is going to get generated, and it's going to be sent to this server URL that we pasted here, which is just going to be our webhook. So we're going to wait for that. So one thing I forgot to mention was to set your webhook to a post method, otherwise it won't work. It wasn't working for me, and then I figured I forgot to do that, but I called them again, and you can see that we get a bunch of information here. At some point, we're gonna find the transcript. So right here you can see AI user, AI user. So this is what the agent said when he picked up the phone, and this is what I asked. And so what I want to be able to do is to be able to get that transcript and upload it into Zep to start building that brain. So in order to do that, we're going to start off by adding a filter. And the reason for adding the filter is just to make sure that what we're passing through is the end of call report. So I'm going to look for a message type in here, message type. And then we want to make sure it's the end of call report. So you can either type it or just copy and paste it. That's just an extra layer of protection to make sure that we only run it when an end of call report is being sent to the webhook, which should be 100% of the time, but just being precautious. And then what I want to do is to be able to change the names of the different roles. So as you see here in the transcript that's received, it says AI and user. But if I go into Zep, and I'm going to go back to my other project just to show you an example. So, and if I go into this demo graph and I go into the thread, you can see there's two role types, user and assistant. It's not user and AI. So I want to be able to change that role type and also store it in a specific JSON structure. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to go ahead and pin this information just so that we don't have to call the agent over and over again. But we're going to use a code node. And I'm just going to paste the code that I have, and I'm going to have it in the resources as well if you want to use it. But pretty much what it does is extracts the webhook payload, and it shows the structure as an array. So the whole conversation is an array. And let me run it real quick. As you can see, we get an array that's called conversation, which has multiple objects in it, and pairs, which are going to be role and message. And all of these are in order. So we have the assistant, what they said, user, what they say. And what I want to do is I want to loop over these and upload it into Zep one by one. So we're going to do that now. But before we do that, we got to create the user inside Zep, create the profile inside Zep. And for the profile, we're just going to use the phone number, which is going to be like their identifier inside Zep. So in order to do that, I'm just going to add it into a variable so that it's easier to play around with. User ID. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the webhook, look for the phone number. So if you see here, you're going to find an object that's called customer, and you're going to find the number there. We just want to map that inside. So now if I want to create a user inside Zep, I first got to search if they exist or not inside of the system, because if they do exist, then there's no need for us to create them again. And this would be the case if they're calling back, or if it's, let's say, their fourth call with the agent, then we don't have to create them again inside Zep. So if we look into the documentation for Zep, there's multiple different endpoints that they have, but we're only going to be using a few. The first one that we're going to be using is get the user. So it's a very simple call, and I'm not really going to read through this, and I'm just going to do it over at N8N and show you how to actually build the HTTP request to the API. So I'm just going to open HTTP. And this is what we want to do. For getting a user, we're going to use the method get. As you can see, if we go back into the documentation, it says get, and then the endpoint is just going to be API v2 and then the user. So I'm going to paste that in there, and then I want to go ahead and execute this just so that we can map the phone number directly into here. So I'm going to map it inside, and there's one thing you have to do before this works, because we're having a plus sign in a URL. It's going to mess up the way that the call is being made, so you want to add this function before the phone number. So it's called encode URI component, and then you close that up in parentheses. And so you can see it added a %2b, which represents a plus in URL. And now we want to create our authentication. We can use a predefined credential type. There's a lot of types in here. If you go all the way down, you're going to find Zep API. We can go ahead and create a new one. And what you want to do here is you want to paste the API key of your project. So if you remember, I saved mine in this sticky note. So I'm going to keep editing, paste it in there. Make sure you turn on cloud, because we're using the cloud version of Zep. Rename it. I'm just going to put tutorial. Hit save. You're going to get this error that says couldn't connect with these settings, but if you get the green check down here, then it means it's all right. Once we do that, we're pretty much set. We just want to make sure we add an additional option, which is going to be response and then never error. So if I run this, it should return an empty object or something else because the user does not exist in that specific project yet. So I'm gonna run it and let's see what we got. We got a message not found. So now we can use this logic in like a switch or an if statement that says if the user is not found, then we want to create the user, create the thread for that user, and then continue with the flow. Before we do that, since we're going to be using a switch, we need to reference certain variables. And the only way for us to reference those variables, one of them being the user ID and the other one just being the transcript itself, we need to add them into a set node. So I'm going to open set, create variable 1, transcript. This is going to be an array, which is coming from the code node. I'm just going to drag in the whole conversation. And now we're going to have ID, which is the same as the one we previously had. So now we can just rename this as variables. Now we can go ahead and add our switch. And the only reason I do this again is just because if I don't do it, then I won't be able to reference all the way back. For some reason in N8N, you can only reference what's up to the switch. So like right before the switch. And we're going to have two routes here. I'm going to run this. And so first route is going to be if it's not found. So if the message is, and we can just hard code not found, make sure it's under a string. And then we can say string not equal to. We're going to use the same variable. Not found. There we go. Before we move on, I want to clear up a concept that it's a little bit confusing, but this is just how Zep works. So we have users, and inside users, we have threads, which threads are independent conversations. So we're going to have to create two different things here, the user and the thread. So as you can see, this is a user who can have multiple threads, and each thread is just a conversation. And so the two endpoints that we're going to be using are going to be post to add user, which is taken as an input the user ID, and post start a new thread, which takes in a thread ID and a user ID. The thread ID, we're just going to be using the phone number, same as the user ID. So in the end, it will look something like this. You're going to have a phone number as the user and then a thread as the user. Obviously, you can do this a different way, but this is just to not overcomplicate it and just think as the ID as the phone number. And so I'm not going to dive deep into how the documentation works because it's very simple. So I'm just going to show you the HTTP requests and how you can set them up yourself. So for creating the user, it's going to be very simple. You're just going to go ahead and set a post method. Then you're going to use a very similar endpoint, but instead of adding anything in the URL, you're just going to do /users. Then you're going to click your credential that we predefined already. So I'm going to switch this to tutorial, and then we're going to be sending a body. The body content type is going to be JSON, and we're going to specify the body using the fields below. Really, the only parameter you're going to be sending is going to be a user ID. You're not going to need a session ID as it was shown before. That was just an outdated call that I made. So once you've set up your user ID, we can go ahead and set up the thread ID. For this case, we're going to be using an endpoint. Instead of saying users, it's going to say threads. Same thing, pick the right API. And I'm going to get rid of these pre-filled ones because these are from a different flow. But you're going to have two input variables. One's going to be the user ID, which we already set. And really, it's just going to be the phone number, like I said before. And then the thread ID, same thing. Once you have those two set, now you can go ahead and test it and then check the project and see if it worked. So I'm just going to run this from scratch using the pin data that I have. And so it looks like I had a success. If I go back into the project itself, I should probably close these tabs because we're not going to need them anymore. And I go to the right project and I hit reload. We're going to see the user got created and the thread got created. So we're all set on that part. And I'm just going to rename this into get user. It's a little confusing just having it as HTTP. And so with that, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and iterate through the array or loop over it so that we can update the thread. So for that, we're going to need a split out. And the reason we need a split out is because we're going to be using an array. And here we're just going to put in the name of that array. Transcript. And then we're going to hit on all fields. And if we execute it, you can see that we had no output in the data. And this is because, like I said, the way that N8N works when it comes to switches or if statements, you got to be able to reference things over and over again in order to use them down your flow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new set here. And I'm just going to call it set transcript. And it's basically going to be the same set that I have here, but we gotta re-reference again our variable. So I already did this one. Now all I have to do is just grab the user ID. And so also make sure that your variables match. So this should be matching whatever variable name you used in your other set. So now if I hit run on the split out, we can see we have like separate groups now in which each we have the phone number and the transcript with each role and message. Now what we can go ahead and do, so now we can add a loop. We're going to want to replace this one. And really what we want to do in the loop is go over this one by one as in the same order that they're coming in. So this one's going to be stored first, then this one, and then this one. So for that, we're going to need to make a call to Zep. I already have the HTTP here, which is going to be add memory. So very simple again. This is what the endpoint looks like. It's just going to be v2 threads. Then we're going to have the user ID and then the messages. So for the user ID here, I'm just going to execute this so that we get some data over. I'm going to map the ID. And what I want to do is do the same thing, encode URI component. This is so that we get it in a good format that is readable by the API call. And now we're going to have our credential. We're going to send a body. So let me explain to you this body. So in the documentation, it says that in order for us to use this endpoint, we're going to need 3 different inputs. One of them is going to be role type, other one's going to be role, other one's going to be content. So role type and role are going to be the same, and then content is just going to be whatever message we get here. So we can just map those inside there. So role, message. And one thing I want to emphasize in message is we want to use a function that's called JSON.stringify, not stringify. So stringify, and then we actually want to remove the quotes because this is going to add quotes, as you can see, automatically. And the reason why we're doing this is because we might have apostrophes and other special characters that might mess up our JSON. And another thing we want to do is we're going to add an OR logic, and then we're going to input an empty string. It's just so that in case we don't get any content or it was like an error, we don't get an undefined and it messes up our workflow. And so with that, we pretty much have it. But this is another crucial step. You gotta add a wait. Because we're gonna be looping over these, we're gonna add a wait of 1 second in between each message that's being uploaded. This is because if we don't set one, the loop's gonna go really fast and everything's gonna be uploaded in a very pushy way. So we're gonna see it in a different order. So that's why we need to add that 1 second. Then we connect the loop back and we pretty much have it there. I'm going to go ahead and run the whole thing. As you can see, 3 messages were added. We didn't create one because we have already done that. And let me go back into the memory now. Let me reload here the thread. And here we have our 3 messages. Assistant, hello Josue. This was the opening messages, what I said and what it replied. That was probably the hardest part of the whole build. Now we want to go ahead and be able to pull that thread and that context and use it in the prompt that's going to be generated when we trigger in the agent. So back here in our call trigger, I'm going to disconnect this and I'm going to have an HTTP in between. And I've already have it set up, but it's very simple. We're going to have a context window call, which is going to be a get method. And the endpoint is just going to be messages. So you're going to have threads /ID /messages. And what this is going to do is it's going to pull over all the history like this thread right here. So I'm going to change my credential to, and let me reload this because for some reason it's not showing up. So there we have it. And oh, I didn't pin the data. Let me go into my executions and pin. This is a very good trick if you don't know it. You just want to go ahead and go into your executions and pin stuff, so you're not constantly calling the agent, which can be pretty draining. So let me call this, and you can see we get this very hard to read variable that includes the thread, but it's not really in a clean way. So we want to add a node that takes care of cleaning that output. I'm just going to add code. And I'm going to paste the code that's also going to be available in the blueprint when I post it in my resources. And so let me run it and see what the output looks like. As you can see, it's cleaner. We have assistant, user, and what we want to do is we're going to be pasting that over here where it says call history in our prompt. It should be going in there. And the cool thing about this code is that I've also added the functionality so that you can input your own context window. So if I have it set to 20, it's going to be pulling the previous 20 interactions that we've had with the agent itself. But if you set it to 10, it's just going to pull the 10. If you set it very high, then that's going to make your prompt really long and it's going to mess up with the accuracy of the agent. So around 20 works pretty well. So I'm going to call this thread history. And now we want to get thread context. So for this, I am going to go into documentation because I want to show you guys what that actually means. If we go under get user context, which is the endpoint we're going to be using, we have as an input the thread ID / context. It says returns the most relevant context from the user graph, including memory from any old past threads based on the content of the past few messages of the given thread. It's just going to be pulling context, like a general idea of what has occurred in the conversation. So there's that. If we run it, let's see what we get. So we get a lot of information in here, which is pretty much summaries of different entities. But what I like to do is I like to summarize this just so that our prompt doesn't get too long, just trying to make it remember stuff. So I'm going to add an OpenAI step. And this one's going to be called summarize context. And here's the prompt. We're going to have a system prompt. You're an intelligent conversation analysis assistant. Then we're going to have a user prompt where we're going to give it sort of the instructions. So let me open this up. Very simple. You'll be provided with a conversation, definitions of entities. The requirements are that there should be a clarity and concise summary, cover the key elements and the relevance. And the goal is to produce a clear, factual, and concise summary, as mentioned before. And then the next user prompt is just going to be the output from the HTTP request. So if I run that, Josh from some HVAC creator Josue, referred as Joe's Way. That's how the brain stored my name, which is kind of funny. And then establishing a report. So, just a shorter summary of what has happened. And now we can plug this back into our response webhook, which is responsible for actually calling the agent. And if you remember, we had these two variables here, context and call history, and we're just going to map whatever we got from the thread history into call history and whatever we got from the AI step into the context. So let's go ahead and do that. If I go into my thread history, I can go into call history, and we're going to do a similar thing as we did before. So let me remove those quotes, do json.stringify, and then we're gonna have an or, and then we can just do none in the case we don't have a call history, which would be in the case that it's the first time we're calling. And then for content, we can just map it into the context. As you can see, this is what the payload's going to look like. And for this one, we don't have to do the or none, because if there's no context, the AI automatically says none. And with that, we're pretty much done. So now we're going to go ahead and test it. I'm going to go into the tutorial project. I'm going to delete the user that I already have, and we're going to run the test again as we did in the beginning. But before we do that, we got to change our webhooks. So we've been using the test URL for testing purposes, but we want to go ahead and use the production URL. And we're going to activate the workflow. And we're going to change those in Vapi. Remember that first one, we had it over here in our phone. As you can see here, it says test. We're just going to paste it and pretty much gets rid of the test. And we're going to do the same thing for our end of call report. That way we don't have to hit test every single time. We're going to activate it. And now we're going to go into our assistant, go back into advanced, messaging, map it in there, publish, skip and publish, and now we can go ahead and test. And one last thing. So if you note here in the payload, I have hard coded my first name. But in reality, you want to have a step somewhere here in between these two webhook steps in which you're calling your CRM and getting information using their phone number. And that information is going to include the first name, and you're going to want to map that in there. So while we're here, I noticed that I just simply put none in here. We got to also rewrite the function so that we don't get an error. Stringify, and then just close that up. And then just to be safe, we're going to do the same thing for the context. rid of those quotations because we don't need them. And now I can just save this and call the agent.
Hello, Josue. This is Josh from Sun HVAC. How can I help you today?
Hey, I'm good. Do you want to know a fun fact about me?
Sure, Josue. I'd love to hear your fun fact. What's something interesting about you?
I have a cat.
Nice. That's a great companion. Are you calling about any HVAC needs?
Alright, so go into executions, you see we succeeded. But what we want to watch here are the executions on the when it's storing the memory. So we're gonna give it a few seconds here, and then looks like it succeeded. Let me go into tutorial, reload this, and here we have the conversation. As you can see, cats make a good companion. So let me call him back and see what he says, if he remembers.
Hello, Josue. This is Josh from Sun HVAC. How can I help you today?
Hey, do you remember a fun fact about me?
Hey, Josue. Yes, you mentioned you have a cat. How can I help you with your HVAC needs?
So now if I leave this active, like every single time I end the call with that specific agent, then we're gonna have the transcript get uploaded into Zep. And as more conversations go on, the relationship graph is gonna get bigger. Right now, obviously it's very small. We only have a few things, one of them being fun fact. If I click on it, user mentioned they have a fun fact that they want to share. But yeah, that's it. Pretty cool stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, I think the very good case when this could be useful is if you're creating an ecosystem of multiple agents that need to kind of have a memory together. So let's say if you have an agent that qualifies, but then you have an agent that follows up on proposals that have already been sent, then you can have the agent that sends the proposals, call Zep to pull the information from that same user and use that memory on how the conversation went in the steps before they get to the proposal point. So I hope you found this video helpful. I'm going to be leaving a link down to my Gumroad. You're going to be able to find both blueprints as well as the prompt that I used for Vapi so that you can just open it up, import it into your own N8N instant and start playing around with it. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.